Hi everyone, I'm Miss Lydia from the Boston Library. Thank you so much for joining me for Craft Friday. Today we are using mini marshmallows to make some really fun igloos. So you can do a lot of variations with this craft. I'm using a paper plate as my base here, and then I have a styrofoam bowl that I'm going to use as the base for my igloo. But you can also use a cup, you can use a milk jug, you can use an empty water bottle as well. You just have to cut it down to a size that works as your base. This one is already the most igloo shaped. So what I'm going to do to start this is I'm just going to cut a small opening in the front. And then you'll have a doorway. If you use a cup, you're just going to cut it a little bit shorter. So you can cut right into it and just make it shorter. And then you'll do the same thing with this by cutting a little arc for your door, just like that. Now, if you're going to use a water bottle, you're going to do about the same process. You're going to cut off the bottom of the water bottle, create a little doorway. Same thing with the milk jug. The milk jug is going to give you a much wider base to work with, a much bigger igloo as well. Now, if you want to, you can also use a half of a toilet paper roll or a paper towel roll to create a little entryway. So you just cut that in half and place that at the front. Depends on the size. So you can kind of visualize it if you're using a cup on your paper plate. You can visualize that tunnel coming out of the front there. For the bowl, we don't really need it. It's going to take up most of the base anyways. Now, as far as building materials go, once we have our base set, and you can glue this down to the paper plate if you want to. You don't have to. It can be movable as well. You can use the mini marshmallows. You can use larger marshmallows if you're using a larger base. You can also use the white styrofoam packing peanuts, or you can use cotton balls. So basically whatever you have on hand. I like the mini marshmallows because they do look like little blocks of snow. And as far as glue goes, you can use hot glue. Obviously you have to be very careful with that. You don't want to burn your fingers, especially if you're using small pieces like this. You can also use Elmer's glue. You just have to be a little bit more patient with that as you're stacking your rows. You're going to start from the bottom and work your way up. But you want to allow the bottom time to dry as you're stacking up so that they don't just slide off as you're working. You can also use frosting as well if you want, something like a royal icing, something that will harden to create more of a glue effect. So it's a pretty simple process. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to start with my hot glue, again being very careful not to get any of that on my fingers, and I'm starting right next to my doorway, right at the base. And I'm just going to start gluing my marshmallows on there. I'm going to take a ring all the way around the base. Depending on how quickly you can work, you could run a bit of a line of glue. If you're using the hot glue, you have to move pretty quickly. If you're using Elmer's glue, you can run this glue all the way around the base and then fill in. Now that I have a row all the way around the bottom, you can see these are kind of stacked flat because the bowl curves out. My next row, I'm going to try to stagger my seams a little bit on that so that they look like they're stacked blocks. So I'm going to put one in between each of these as I go around the next row. As I continue with this, I'm going to keep going up layers and staggering my seams. I will mess with the door at the end of it, so I'm going to get all of the rest of it done before that. The doorway is the spot where the hot glue really comes in handy. If you're using Elmer's glue or frosting, you really have to be fairly patient with the doorway. They do start to sink, so you want to let that glue start to harden up and then stick them on there. Right over the arc is a little bit tricky to get them to stick. With the hot glue, it's pretty simple. You're just going to continue to place those up over top. Again, trying to stagger your seam if possible. Now that my doorway is done, I'm going to finish off the roof. Now with this, you can go a couple of different ways. You can just continue to stack them and have kind of a flat roof, continue gluing them all the way across the top, or you can lay a layer down there and then build up a little bit more so you get a more gradual dome at the top. So you can see what this looks like with just one layer on the top. It's actually pretty domed. If you wanted to, you could continue going in another layer and adding one more layer on top of those marshmallows, which would give you something that looks a little bit like that. I don't think it's enough of a difference on this particular shape to go through that. So at this point, the basic igloo is done. You've got a lot of customization on this. So you can add little polar creatures, you could add penguins, you can add polar bears, you can, like I said, add that little porch area in the front or your entryway with a toilet paper roll. You can even use part of the, if you wanted to, if you had a bigger plate, you could use a half of a cup to do that same thing. So if I cut this, just like this, you can see how that would fit on the front of that right there. So if you have a big enough base to use, you can use that as well. And just you could go over this the same way with those marshmallows. Here we have my finalized igloo. Obviously the cup is a tiny bit oversized, so if you did have a paper towel roll, it might fit just a little bit better. Then you want to make sure that you get it very carefully covered with marshmallows so you don't see any of that brown. Once you're done, you can add your decorations. You can even put a small battery-powered tea light inside, and that gives it a little bit of a glow as well. These will last a really long time. What you'll notice is that the texture of your marshmallows will change based on the humidity. So when you first put it together, they're soft and squishy. If it gets really dry, they will harden up. And then if you save it long enough and it gets humid again, they'll soften right back up. But they do last quite a while if you keep them dry. And there you have your igloo made out of marshmallows.